What made the prophet decide to choose a church in Louisville instead of Jeffersonville? If he really became ordained and started preaching in 1930 as he claimed, before Davis moved his church to Jeffersonville, something must have attracted him to Davis's church. I began digging through the old Louisville Courier-Journal newspapers to find something, anything, that would have had enough publicity to attract people from Jeffersonville. To my surprise, I found several articles about Roy Davis. He was gaining quite a bit of publicity, but not the type of publicity that I was looking for. In 1930, the same year that the prophet started preaching, Roy Davis was denounced by Louisville ministers for using the name Baptist for his Pentecostal assembly. Local ministers wanted to make sure that the public was aware that Davis was by no means a Baptist minister, and they did not condone his actions or practices. That year, Davis was in and out of court and in and out of jail. In March, he defrauded one Miss Minnie Burgeon in a scheme attempting to gather enough money to purchase a larger church. In October, Davis was arrested for violation of the Mann Act with a 17-year-old child, Allie Lee Garrison. Under the provisions of the Mann Act, it was illegal for a man to take an underage girl across state lines for the purposes of sex. October 14, 1930, Davis was indicted by a grand jury and started serving a jail sentence. Oddly, 60 women showed up at the court trial to protest. The thought suddenly occurred to me, if the prophet started preaching in 1930 as he claimed, and he was an active, ordained minister in Roy E. Davis's church at the time as he claimed, and the media was publishing the illegal and the immoral activities of Roy E. Davis, there was a good chance that Roy E. Davis himself could provide a glimpse into his church. I found a letter to the editor of the Courier-Journal by a reader upset with Roy E. Davis. Davis had been publicly arguing with M.P. Hunt, who had apparently thoroughly investigated Roy Davis's background and criminal activities in other states. I began searching for previous communications by Roy Davis, and I came across another letter to the editor signed by Roy E. Davis himself. In the article, Davis described the environment inside of his own church during sermons. To appeal to the public, Davis used common events inside the church and associated them with his position on prohibition, which would have been a hot topic in Louisville, especially with all of the distilleries that could have employed many people during the onset of the Great Depression. For Louisville and southern Indiana, prohibition was costing jobs. According to Davis, drunken men sat in the laps of women in the congregation, while drunken women disrupted service by leaving their seats for men. Young, school-age boys and girls were so drunken that they could not walk, according to Davis's description of his congregation. He wrote, "In my own church in this city, I've had to leave the pulpit to raise drunken men out of the laps of members of my congregation. I've had to take women, drunken women, by the arm in the presence of my congregation and lead them to seats. It is not an uncommon thing to see from 1 to a half dozen drunks in my audience." As I read, I tried to reconcile the image that it created with my memories and the message. The prophet's first ministry was far from what I had pictured. Never in a million years would I have imagined the prophet participating in a service with drunkards. I realized that it was time to learn more about the Reverend Roy E. Davis. Why did he leave his church in Louisville to come to Jeffersonville? How was he able to continue preaching after a criminal indictment with an underage girl? What made William Branham decide to continue with Roy Davis after he moved to Jeffersonville? It seemed that there was much more to Roy E. Davis than met the eye. I knew that if I would find more information about Davis, I could unlock the door that held many secrets the prophet had withheld about the origins of the message. It was time to examine the first church that Roy E. Davis started in Jeffersonville.